Seahawks fans, wherever you may be. Thanks for listening to the show. Join your hosts, Bill Alvstad and Keith Myers, as we talk Seahawks football. Hey, Seahawks fans. Welcome back to another episode of the Seahawks Playbook podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, sitting down with co-host Keith Myers here to talk Seahawks football, get you caught up on Seahawks training camp since the last time we recorded. And we're going to kind of focus in today's show on some camp battles that are happening in different position groups throughout the roster. Just kind of a general fun conversation as we prepare for the second preseason game this weekend. And against the Dallas Cowboys, should be a good game. I think it might be the game where you see more starters play a little bit more through the first half, and also guys fighting for roster spots throughout the roster. And we're here to talk about it all. Welcome in.
Yeah, especially after with first preseason game in the books, second one coming up. This is kind of that spot where if guys are going to make a statement and show that they belong, then they've got to do it, and they've got to do it, now, because all of the slow lead in that you get during training camp, well, that's done. Like now, these guys have to show that they belong, or they're not going to make the roster.
Yeah, no, absolutely, for sure. And there's some interesting battles. There's a number of battles at almost every position group. We don't have to talk about all of them, like Drew Lock, Holton Ahlers. That's not really a battle per se, but Holton Ahlers is kind of fighting for a spot on the practice squad. Teams can have 3 quarterbacks on the roster if they so choose this year, or any year. But that'll be interesting to see if Ahlers can do enough to be the guy that Seahawks want to take into their practice squad for the season, or if they opt to go somewhere else in a different direction with a different quarterback. I always think that those things are interesting because I'm always wishing for the team to develop a young quarterback at the position. Obviously now that's Drew Lock. The team feels pretty confident in him, likes him. Drew Lock obviously likes the Seahawks. There's been some statements lately of why he came back, why he signed with them, as opposed to trying to go out and find something maybe a little bit easier to get into a competition for a starting role. And so that's kind of the team's view on that. What about you, Keith?
Yeah, I mean, he's kind of expensive to be a young developmental guy. You know what I mean? As far as what they're paying him, he's more of a legit backup. And I do think they believe in him, but clearly they don't believe in him enough to give him a shot as a starter, right? Because they didn't really give him that much of a chance last year when it was technically a competition before Geno Smith had his breakout year. I just look at him and I'm like, I think they want him here because he offers them a chance to win if Geno gets hurt. I also think that he's on a 1-year deal, in part because he thinks he can start. The team thinks he can start. So he's going to get an opportunity to at some point.
Yeah, whether it's with this team or another team, I don't, as far as Geno Smith is concerned, I mean, he's the guy for sure. And unless something happens with him injury-wise, he's going to be the guy. But, it's kind of fun to watch Drew Lock, only because I'm interested in developing that guy, even if it's a guy that we could take as a tradable asset at some point, which would be interesting, especially if they really liked Holton Ahlers for whatever reason. You could have Drew Lock on the roster and flip him for draft picks later on down the line, either this year, next year, whatever, however that works out. How about running back? Is there any position? Any guys out there that are standing out as far as the battles at that spot?
Well, the only thing that I would look at with that is, Kenny McIntosh, despite having a good beginning, summer and beginning of camp, he's been hurt, hasn't been active. And while he's been gone, Brian Kovacs kind of stepped in and shown that he can play. And So that becomes a situation there where that they need to look at, does Kovac end up taking that last spot and they get McIntosh through to the practice squad, or does McIntosh start the year on IR? Or does McIntosh come back and reestablish his spot as that last running back on the roster? So that's really the only thing that's going on at running back. Yeah, I know Ken Walker's back from his injury, and so they need to figure out who's going to get a certain number of snaps between him and Charbonnet and DJ Dallas and that. But those top three are pretty well set.
Yeah, I agree with everything you just said. My only thing at the top there is how those snaps are divided, and you said it, and I think it comes down to between Dallas and Charbonnet. Dallas is having a great camp. He had a great finish to last season. That's kind of carried over from all accounts, and Zach Charbonnet is a guy that they really like and has been showing up, in camp and also in the first game. The Kenny McIntosh thing is interesting, that the timing on his return is going to be a factor. And that's one of the battles that I'll be watching is, Bryant Kovac emerged out of a list of 4 or 5 guys, with Chris Smith and Saradrick Thompson and Wayne Tuilapapa, as far as being guys that can compete for the tail end of that spot. But they're likely to carry 4 running backs this season, only because it's likely that they might carry 6 wide receivers, and so that's going to be interesting to me. Brian Kovac had the highest Pro Football Focus grade of any offensive player in last week's game, with an 88.5 grade, also receiving the ball out of the backfield as well. So. He's an interesting name to watch. He's been around a little bit. This is, I think, his second training camp. Prior to that, he was with Minnesota last year, spent some time on some practice squads. So he's got some ability, and he looked pretty good in that preseason game.
Yeah, he also was playing against, third, fourth string guy at the end of the game. So grain of salt in terms of looking at stats and that kind of stuff. But at the same time, you're right, he did look the part. He showed some explosiveness, showed he could pick the right hole, and that kind of stuff. So there's something there, and he just needs to continue that. And McIntosh needs to get healthy, or he's going to get Wally pipped and lose his job. I
don't think so. I think they really like Kenny McIntosh. I don't think they're going to expose him to a practice squad situation by clearing waivers. I don't think that would happen. I think that he would get picked up. He's just too good to do that, just based on the timing of the injury and so forth, to hold that against him and then lose that spot. I think it would be way easier to get Bryant Kovac onto the practice squad, to be completely honest. I think that's probably what
McIntosh was a 7th round pick. It's not like the rest of the NFL coveted him in any way.
I disagree a little bit, Keith.
And
there,
how?
He
was the 7th round pick.
Well, that's because of the testing numbers, but he's definitely has the agility and quickness.
He hasn't shown
that go beyond that.
If he doesn't play in a preseason game, and he was at what point did he go from being a 7th round pick to being someone that?
Well, I'll tell you where, between draft day and training camp, because the team he's been in the off-season program. The team has been around him, has seen him, seen his work ethic, all that kind of stuff. So they know what they've got in him. One
team has seen him, and the team he's currently on. The other 31 haven't.
Yeah.
So how would his stock improve that much?
Because I believe that, these sorts of players and with these abilities, that news travels around the NFL pretty quickly, as well as his agent would be all over that, and I think find him a job fairly quickly as a back end of the roster kind of running back for almost any team that needs a running back or an infusion of a guy that can come in and be one of the best wide receiver or best receiving backs out of the backfield out of this draft. I just don't think that he's going to be a guy that you can sneak through. I really don't.
He's a guy that would be becoming a free agent or going on waivers at the same time as a little over 1,000 other guys.
I know. Isn't that crazy? That is crazy. It's true.
So again, what makes him so coveted? When there's 1,000 guys out there, I just don't.
You haven't seen it yet because you haven't seen it.
No, you're right, and neither has any of the other 31 teams.
Sure,
they haven't seen it. They have his agent trying to tell them that he's good,
and they have his college tape, and they,
which
I just think that he's a little bit more
so much that nobody drafted him.
I think that he could have gone earlier had his testing numbers been slightly better. I believe that he's a guy that's going to emerge if given the opportunity. So we'll see. I mean, here we go. I mean, right there is a perfect example of why we think it's a bit of a camp battle, and I do. And I think Bryant Koback is definitely earning that spot where he's in that competition, that conversation. That's a big thing. And there
was no competition a week and a half ago. We knew who the running backs were going to be, and the other guys were just camp bodies. Now there's a competition, and Koback is the reason for that competition, not McIntosh.
I agree. No, I agree with that. I mean, you can't be in the competition if you're on the sideline.
Yeah. So, you also aren't going to be in a competition if you're not good, right? Koback has earned. He's created a competition where there wasn't one. McIntosh isn't helping his case by being hurt, but if Koback hadn't emerged, it wouldn't matter that McIntosh was hurt. He's still making, you know what I mean? Like, he's still the guy. They would need someone to replace him, and they may have found one. So, we'll see how that goes.
Let's talk about wide receivers. Derek Young and Eskridge. We've talked about that before. Eskridge is going to be on suspension for the first 6 games, plus the injury. Derek Young, however, has been also injured and not able to show up. We'll see how that goes. I don't know exactly when he's going to be ready to kind of come back and participate and appear in a game, but that has opened up a competition for that 4th, 5th, 6th spot on this roster, and there's one name that stood out so far.
Jake Bobo is the guy that stood out. He stood out in practice regularly. He stood out in the preseason game. He stood out in the mock game. He stood out. And I mean, there are other.
Well, what about some of those other guys that have been around the roster for a while that the team has developed trust with? Geno Smith has developed rapport with, like Cody Thompson, Kate Johnson, for example.
Yeah, those guys are in the competition too. There's some injury there, so that's something to watch. But at the same time, like, I look at it, and some of those. I mean, I think it was Cody Thompson didn't play in the game, or was it Kate Johnson? One of the two didn't play in the game in the preseason game. I don't have it in front of me. And the other one did, but it was Jake Bobo who got the start opposite.
Yeah,
Jake
Cody Thompson was out.
Yeah. And so that tells me that the coaches are looking at him as a guy that is going to get snaps in the regular season, because if he wasn't, he wouldn't be starting. You know what I mean? He wouldn't be in there with the ones. Now, he made his biggest impact later in the game again, but he still got snaps with the ones in a game. And yes, I'm not saying he's a starter, because he still got the top 2 guys that didn't play or anything like that. But we're trying to find out who's the next guy, who's going to likely make the list as the 5th or 6th receiver. And it would look like right now that Jake Bobo has the lead over everybody else. But there's probably more than one spot there, because even if he makes the team, even if Derek Young gets healthy and reclaims his spot, there's still another spot. And so you've got that Cody Thompson, Cade Johnson, and Winston Easop Jr. Battling for that spot. And Easop's a guy that he was the punt returner, and they liked what they saw from him. And
that's
the slot guy.
That's the most important point I think you've made.
Special teams.
In that punt returner role, that's valuable. If he is their number 1 punt returner, he's making the roster. and that's just the way it is. I do, Cody Thompson's been around for a while. I mean, I before we pressed record, I think I said that I thought this was his 4th training camp with the Seahawks, and I think it is. He's been on the practice squad on and off. He's been cut. He's been brought back up. They like him. Geno Smith likes him. Cade Johnson, similar thing. He's one of Tyler Lockett's favorite wide receivers out of this group. Great guy by all accounts. And so those guys are definitely in there. And here's this guy, Jake Bobo. He's a fan favorite already, and he's a clubhouse favorite. I mean, these guys talk about him constantly around the locker room already. And I think he's having an effect. I really do. Despite the fact that the guy ran a 4.9940 at his pro day.
That's offensive line slow.
It's slower than our 2 starting offensive tackles, in Abraham Lucas and Charles Cross, which is hard to even fathom. It's hard to fathom a 4.99 guy that would even have an opportunity to come into a game.
Did he look like a 4.99 plotter during the game?
Explain that to people that don't understand route running and all that kind of stuff.
Well, I mean, part of it is there's a couple different things as far as that. If you look at just the number, the 4.99, is that an accurate measurement?
It was on that day.
It was on that day. Sure. That's a measurement of how fast he finished the 40. It's not necessarily a measure of how fast he is, right? Because I look at his touchdown where he got behind someone. Both that part of that's route running and getting the guy thinking he was going inside when he was going out, and that. But if you run as fast as an offensive lineman, it doesn't matter how good your routes are. You're not getting behind a cornerback, and so I think what you have here is a situation where he had a really bad day, right? Whether it was a bad start, whether it was something was hurt and he was trying to play through it, whether it was that he had, because some guys do this where they overtrain and their muscles are just sapped and they don't have anything for the combine. And so occasionally that happens. And maybe it's that kind of situation. But his tape from college and what we saw in the game, he has not run slower than Charles Cross. I think that's pretty obvious. He's also a polished route runner, especially for a rookie. His ability to get defenders to turn their hips in the wrong direction and that kind of stuff in order to make space is good. He's 6'5". That certainly doesn't hurt. And he's got great hands. He catches everything that gets near him. So,
right.
Yeah, I don't see a guy with offensive lineman speed when I watch any of his tape. Yeah. So he's fast.
I don't remember the 4.99. I actually read that this morning. I remember. I thought I remembered when we were in draft discussions and picking him up right after the draft that he was kind of a 4.6 guy, which would have been still kind of one of those questionable guys that make rosters. You come to like a Steve Largent, for example, who was a 4.5, 6 or 7 guy. Clearly not thought of as being a speedster at all in the NFL, even back in the 70s, and won by being a superior route runner and having really good feet, some of the best feet you'll ever see. And just having that instinct to be able to find the opening, the space, the turning around defensive backs. And even for a 4.55 guy, Steve Largent could put 12 yards between him and a defensive back in a matter of 4 or 5 seconds and be that open down the field behind a corner.
He could. Cornerbacks had no idea where he was going, and as soon as they turned their hips, he was going the other direction, and he would set them up. They'd get spun around. I mean, he was one of the best route runners in the history of the NFL, which is why he's a Hall of Famer. Speed isn't everything. especially when you're 6'5", like Jake Bobo. But yeah, I don't know. I also read that 499, and I'm like, I don't remember it being that bad. I remembered it being bad, but not that bad. More like 4.7 or 4.68 or something like that, which is still terrible, but not offensive line terrible.
Right.
But I'm on the draft, NFL's thing, and they don't have a 40 time listed for him. So
yeah, we'll see. And again, we're talking about back end stuff here. We like Bobo, but the reality is teams make decisions on a number of different ways. There's no guarantee that he would make the roster, even if he had performances like he did for the next two preseason games. Sometimes teams make weird decisions. We've seen this at this position group prior in this same regime, making decisions that are flabbergasting as far as guys that didn't make the roster. University of Washington wide receiver comes to mind from like 7-8 years ago that seemingly did everything he could in the preseason and then got cut. And you never know what the relationship is like between the team and Cody Thompson and Cade Johnson. Cody Thompson's been around the locker room, been around the team, the coaches for a long time, earned their trust, all that kind of stuff. Who knows? Weird things happen. Okay, let's move to the offensive line, Keith. Talk to me about the battles you're seeing there. I'm really interested in this Phil Haynes versus Jake Curhan thing now, that all of a sudden at right guard, because a guy like Anthony Bradford has moved off that spot.
Yeah. You mentioned the Pro Football Focus grades. The player who got the worst offensive grade out of anyone on the Seahawks was Anthony Bradford.
He had a score of a 3 on his pass blocking grade.
Yeah. So
which I've never seen anything that low in all the time that I've been watching those Pro Football Focus grades.
Yeah. I'm not a big fan of their grading system and the way they do things, because I think there's a lot of mistakes made. But at the same time, like, you don't get a 3 because someone at that website didn't know what your responsibility was and thought you were supposed to be doing something else. You get a 3 because you just get flat beat over and over again. So I think it looks like Anthony Bradford has played himself out of a competition. But Jake Curhan is getting more and more run at right guard. Now, we saw this last year too, where he looked like he might be the guy in that spot. But in the end, even when guys got hurt, it was only in one game when 2 different guys got hurt that Curhan finally got some snaps at right guard. And I don't know. I don't know what we're gonna do as far as like whether that's a thing or whether it's they're just trying to make it so that on game day he has more than one position, so he's more valuable to keep active. But yeah, I mean, he's a guy that is. It's an interesting thing. I like him at guard. I think that's where he belongs. And just so much about what he does. I mean, he's a little tall for a guard, but he's such a good run blocker in that. I like him there. And, Phil Haynes is a league average guy. He's not special. And he's injury prone. So I think you need to have a guy ready to step in, even if Phil Haynes wins the job. I don't know whether the team is thinking, oh, that's Curhan, or whether it just happens to be that they're playing him there to make sure he can play there if they need him to, but they're going to look at a guy like Grindorf as the true backup once the season begins.
Well, Grindorf's a tight end, but how about I knew what Curhan is the true backup. Anthony Bradford's moved over to the left side. I don't really know what his status is. I mean, that's got to be a little disappointing for the team so far, having him not come in being ready to go. Obviously, I think that's what's happening. He just didn't show up in shape, didn't show up ready to go mentally, and he's just fallen behind even though he hasn't been injured at all, which is it's a little disappointing. And then they've had to move like Greg Island, who's been listed as a tackle, now is kind of a backup guard as well now.
Yeah,
And
he was
Kurt
what I
House
was thinking.
listed as a tackle as well.
Grindorf. I was looking at stuff before we hopped on here, and Grindorf's name came up, and I'm like, ooh, I got to remember to mention him because he actually did pretty well and showed really well in the game. And yeah.
So talk to me about center. Evan Brown was the clear favorite, not clear favorite, but was the favorite and earned the starting spots early in camp. Oluwatimi, though, after that game, has earned a lot of praise, as well as having 18 pass blocking snaps with 0 pressures allowed.
Oluwatimi,
has that changed anything?
I don't know, because he also got banged up and is going to miss a couple practices, and that doesn't help him, right? I thought Evan Brown didn't play great. He didn't look like terrible, but he didn't stand out in any way. Whereas I thought Oluwatimi did play really well.
I saw Oluwatimi get beat once on a running play, where a guy just kind of swiped him out of the way and made the tackle for loss. But pass blocking, he was superb. Yeah,
and that's he's more of a pass blocker than a run blocker, just naturally.
And so is Brown.
Yeah. And so I look at that and I think that Evan Brown seemed to have had the lead in that competition. I thought during the game that Oluwatimi shortened that lead, but now he's going to miss a couple practices, and that just gives Evan Brown more time with the ones and limits the competition time. So we'll see, but it's still a good competition. And ultimately, Evan Brown's not the long-term answer at center. He's a 1-year rental. That was a draft hedge in case a guy like Oluwatimi didn't fall to them the way they wanted him to. Oluwatimi did. So they've got him, and they know he's the long-term answer. They want him to get in to games and get experience. Even if Evan Brown wins the job, which at this point it kind of looks like he might, Oluwatimi will play this season. And that'll probably go into next year with him as the starter.
I would think so. All right, let's shift our attention over to the defensive side, Keith. Tell me about your favorite competition that you're seeing right now.
I'm interested. It's a lot of my favorite. That would be in the secondary. That would be in the secondary, but I want to start up front just because I think it's a show. Let's progress that way.
Okay.
At nose tackle, we know that Reed is going to be the starter. That's been established. Pete Carroll's come out and said that's why they signed him. Pretty sure that Cameron Young is going to be the backup at least until Brian Monet is fully healthy, if he's ever fully healthy this year. Which with his knee, he may not.
Seems unlikely. Yeah,
it may be he just has to miss a year and comes back after that. But Sykes put together a good performance in that nose tackle spot, to a point where, do you keep 3 nose tackles on your roster? I don't know if you do.
The thing about Sykes is that he can play 2 different positions.
He can play the 3 tech as well, but he plays it as a run stuffer, not as a guy that could get penetration and that kind of stuff. So yes, he can play a backup in that role, but he's mostly a nose tackle. But he showed pretty well in that game, unexpectedly well, in that game against Minnesota. And it makes me wonder, what does he have to do to earn a spot? Is there a spot for him, no matter how good he plays? Because they're not, it's not like they're going to give up on Cameron.
I think that he would have to beat out Miles Adams for that spot, and they like Miles Adams.
And Miles Adams,
you've got Dre Jones, Jerron Reed, Mario Edwards, Mike Morris. Those are all locks. Cameron Young is a lock.
That's
Ryan Monet is going to start on IR. You got Miles Adams and Jacob Sykes for me are the 2 guys. One of those guys is going to make it. The other guy is not.
Yeah,
you could probably get Sykes, onto the practice squad. Probably Miles Adams as well. Those two players are, Miles Adams in particular, I think is just kind of league average, if that. Struggles a little bit more defending the run.
Yeah,
a
but
guy like
smaller
Sykes,
and more agile against the pass and
true.
NFL.
But they've got plenty of pass guys though on this roster, but lack that's stopping the run guys, which is where the emphasis is on the roster this year.
Yeah. I don't know. I find that his spot and can he get it onto the roster is very interesting to me, because I thought he played well enough in that first preseason game to be in a discussion.
I agree. That's exactly right.
Kind of like Kovac at running back, right? He created a competition where there wasn't one by being good. So, and you gotta love that.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. How about Darrell Taylor versus Boye Mafe, Keith?
Is that even a competition?
That is a question.
Boye Mafe is the guy. Darrell Taylor is a situational pass rusher.
So what I'm saying is that we came into camp thinking Darrell Taylor was the starter, and 1 week into it, not 1 week, but 3 weeks into camp, one preseason game down, Boye Mafe is now the guy, and there's not even a question.
Boye Mafe has gotten continual praise from all the coaches about being, the most improved player from last year. And then he came out in the first preseason game and looked like the best defender on the field.
84.6 grade defending the run.
Yeah.
That's elite.
He looked like the best defender on the field when he was out there. What else do you have to do? Darrell Taylor is a super athletic guy. He's a 4-3 defensive end playing outside linebacker. So in this defense, using him as a situational pass rusher that comes in on third down and just gets after the quarterback and doesn't have other responsibilities is a great way to use a guy like that, because he's going to be extremely effective in that role. That's just the way I see it. It's Mafe's job. I don't see how. What does Darrell Taylor have to do to get back into a competition with Mafe?
I'm not sure if it's possible at this point, to be completely honest. Boye Mafe looks to be superior in every way, in the fact that I think he's going to be more athletic, being able to drop back into coverage if needed. He's going to be able to go forward, rushing the passer. He's proved that. I think in camp, he hasn't had the opportunity yet in games. Now, we're talking about a player in Darrell Taylor that had 9.5 sacks last year. Granted, 5 or 6 of those came in the last 6 weeks. However, this is Darrell Taylor's third season on the field, 4th season in the NFL. He's not going to want to give up that spot. I agree with you, though, that he's more of a 4-3 defensive end, and using him in a situational role, I think, is better for the team. Boye Mafe is clearly the better run stopper, and they need him on the field on early downs. He's going to get better. Start.
He's better against the run, and he's better in coverage. And an outside linebacker, sometimes you have to cover, even though you want to be that pass rusher. Sometimes it's not you. Sometimes it's the guy on the other side that gets to rush the passer, and you have to drop back. And you don't want Darrell Taylor moving backwards, where Mafe is way more comfortable. And missing from this discussion is Hall.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about Hall and Tyreek Smith and maybe even Levin Bell.
I think people keep talking about Tyreek Smith, and I get that, because he's shown well in practice and the coaches like him. But Levin Bell was really effective in that game and just made a lot of things happen.
21 pass rushing reps, 6 quarterback pressures, a sack, 2 quarterback hits, and posted an impressive 28.5% pressure rate and a 37.5% win rate. The issue with Bell, he's only 5'11", and he's 262 pounds. He's kind of a bowling ball kind of guy, but you can take advantage of those sorts of things in the situational pass rusher role. He can get under guys and use that leverage to beat tackles around the edge.
He's a guy. It comes down to, if he's going to make the roster, and him and Smith are battling for a roster spot, it's going to come down to special teams. And from what we saw in that in the game against the Vikings, Bell's a guy that can play special teams.
Yeah. It is interesting that you could have a situation where you could have Nwosu, Taylor, Mafe, Hall, Smith, and Bell make the roster, along with Jones, Reed, Edwards, Morris, Cameron Young, and Miles Adams, or Jacob Sykes. You could have a situation where all those guys make the roster.
Yeah, it's going to be hard, though, because to do that, that means you've got to limit your number of inside linebackers and or drop someone from the defensive secondary. And the secondary is loaded with talent.
Yeah, that's true. Because normally you're going to keep 10 guys on that line between the defensive ends, tackles, and edge guys, right? Or is it more 12?
It's 10 in a 4-3.
Okay.
In a 3-4, it's going to be 8 or 9 on just the defensive line.
Right.
Or I guess if you're counting the edge guys, then yeah, it's going to be 12. So that gives you nose tackle, the 2 ends, and 2 outside linebackers. It's usually 12 total.
Yeah, interesting. All right. I like that battle. I really, there's a lot to like about Levin Bell, but he showed up for one game. Let's see it duplicated and find out. I also want to see Tariq Smith as well. We saw him in that game. He looked okay. I want to see a little bit more, especially as he's moving forward, rushing the passer. That's his specialty. I saw him drop back into coverage a couple times and allow some catches and make some tackles down the field. But I'd like to see him moving forward a little bit. And Derek Hall, I just haven't seen yet. He was in there. I saw him. He looks like he looks the part. But I just need to see him in action for sure and see where he's going to get those rotation.
I thought he played pretty well in the game. He was around the ball a lot on the running plays in the backfield. A couple times he was the second man to the ball, where like Radigan gets credit for the tackle because he's the first one there, but Hall's coming from the far side and still gets through and is the second man there. Yeah. That type of thing. So I thought his athleticism showed up. It's just weird because this team has a second-round draft pick as a backup to Uchenna Nwosu, who they just signed to a long-term deal.
Yeah. Right.
On the other side, you've got a pair of second-round picks in Mafe and Taylor battling it out for playing time as well. I mean, they've invested heavily into that outside linebacker spot, and the depth is showing up. And then you've got Smith and Bell, which are guys that would normally make a team as, the last guy in that position group because of their special teams contribution. But now it's like, is there a spot for them because there's so much talent above them? It's an interesting battle for this defense.
I know you want to get to defensive backs, and we're going to spend some time with that there, but is there anything at the linebacker spot, the off-the-ball linebackers, that you see interesting? How'd Devin Bush, for example, show up in this?
Oh, Devin Bush looked great. And he looked quick, which is the thing that we were concerned about is what happened to his athleticism after the knee injury a few years ago. And but it looked like it was back more than it ever was when he was with Pittsburgh. And so that answered some questions for me. I thought he looked really good. He's probably the starter next to Bobby, which I know he was signed to be, but we kept thinking, we looked at his Pittsburgh tape and we're like, this guy's vulnerable. One of these other guys could take his job, but I think he's pretty much set that. John Radigan also looked pretty good. And then you kind of go back and you look at some of the stuff and you think, well, maybe that he looks like he might have been out of position there. And he did miss that tackle. And, so maybe it wasn't as good as I thought on game day. And then, of course, Vi Jones is hurt. And that should have been a battle that we're talking about here with Vi Jones versus Radigan versus Bush. But with Jones out because of injury, it just makes it a lot less interesting.
Yeah. Ben Burke-Irvin, by all accounts too, has been playing well at the spot. Patrick O'Connell is the other guy there. So
Burke-Irvin's got the start next to Bush and was not impressive.
Yeah, he's just. I think he's just too undersized. Now Devin Bush is undersized, but he's just a better instinctual player than Ben Burke-Irvin. But anyway,
Irvin is a fantastic special teams guy, and therefore the team would love for him to show enough to earn a spot. But he's got to make it as a linebacker first, because they've already got their linebacker only, or sorry, their special teams only person who gets listed at linebacker in Nick Bellore. So Burke-Irvin needs to show that he can stick as a linebacker.
Yeah, and beat other special teams only guys like Joey Blount and Jonathan Sutherland and some of the other back end defensive backs as well that are on there for their athletic attributes. Okay, let's talk.
Jonathan Sutherland. I don't think he's a special teams only guy. He's been getting.
That's debatable when you take a look at how many safeties there are on this roster already.
Yeah, but everyone's counting Kobe Bryant as a safety and thinking, oh, he's got a spot locked in. Kobe Bryant didn't play well
that's true.
at that spot.
He had a 49.3 overall Pro Football Focus grade with a 45 grade in coverage, which is very poor.
And he missed
a
bunch of tackles. So yeah, he made.
But he also made it. He made a couple plays. In fact, one of the biggest hits of the game.
Yeah, but it's one thing to make a big hit, but then miss out a bunch on a bunch of other things, and that's what he did. He had the big hit. That's noticeable. It shows up, but he missed a lot of things. Sutherland.
I agree with Sutherland. Like you said, he took first team snaps at nickel corner with Witherspoon still out with a hamstring.
Yeah, and he's been getting a lot of personal one-on-one coaching from Pete Carroll in practice.
That's a big tell.
Yeah. And they're working him in with the ones both in the nickel and at free safety now. And so I disagree with him being a special teams only player. I think he may end up making the roster. The question is, what do you do with Kobe Bryant at that point? Does he shift back to corner, and does he make the roster as a corner? Do you try to get him through the practice squad? I don't know if you can get him through the practice squad after last year. So the deal with
Kobe Bryant, which is just really interesting to me, is the team trusts him enough to move him all over the place because they want to try to see if they can get him on the field. Mm-hmm. He took 700 snaps last year in the nickel. They drafted basically his replacement in Witherspoon. Obviously, I think they thought Witherspoon would be in competition on the outside, but Mike Jackson has done such a great job. Woolen's already entrenched there. That's it.
Witherspoon's injury hasn't helped either.
True, and a couple of injuries, a couple of hiccups have kept him out of practice. And but by all accounts, he's their nickel guy when he's in there and when healthy. And so Kobe Bryant was kind of forced out. In addition to that, you've got Julian Love and Jerick Reed and Trey Brown that can also play that spot. So the team said, listen, when you show up at camp, we're going to have you learn the safety spot. Now, that's got to be really frustrating for a guy like Kobe Bryant, who's spent all offseason trying to figure out the nickel spot. But, he's willing to do that for the team. However, you've already got Diggs there. Adams is going to come back at some point. Julian Love, Jerick Reed, Joey Blount. They all can play the same spot that Kobe Bryant can play. So is this the guy that is just the odd man out, and you try to get him and get a pick for him to another team before your roster cut downs? And we've seen that on a few occasions in the reverse, where Seattle's picked up a player before cuts as kind of a priority guy. They'd flip a 7th, 6th, 7th round pick to get somebody. That could be the same thing that's going on with Kobe Bryant this year.
It might be showing his versatility, and there's a lot of tape on him from last year. Like you said, 700 snaps, led the team in forced fumbles. It's not like this is a bad player.
No, not at all.
But they just keep finding really talented guys around him and that they want to keep. And I think Kobe Bryant's future with Seattle hinges on Jamal Adams and his health. which I'm not hearing anything about Jamal Adams being close to coming back and getting off of the PUP.
The only thing I've heard about that, Keith, is that Pete Carroll has said more than once that these guys are running full speed, et cetera. They're Jordan Brooks, surprisingly, is more ready in that regard than Adams, but Adams is still moving well and going through all the stuff, just kind of getting in shape.
Yeah.
So he's not like 4 months away. We're talking about weeks at this point, and we just don't know if that's 8 weeks or 2 weeks.
Yeah, and that's the thing is if it's closer to 8 weeks, then he starts the season on the PUP list, and Kobe Bryant makes the roster. If it's 2 weeks and Jamal Adams starts the year on the 53, who loses? Who loses a job? Right?
It's Artie Burns or Kobe Bryant.
I don't know if Artie Burns is on the roster, no matter what.
Well, and Joey Blount's there, Jonathan Sutherland, Artie Burns, and Kobe Bryant. They could be playing literally for 2 spots. So you've got 4 players that are worthy.
Yeah.
2 spots available.
I don't know. Like with Blount, is Sutherland a guy that can knock him off the roster, or at least knock him to the practice squad?
Sutherland played in the nickel, which surprised me because he's thought of more as a strong safety. But if they're thinking of him in that regard, where he's more of a hybrid guy, and they like him like that, Joey Blount may be on the outside looking in, but they like Joey Blount too. He's a great special teams player.
They like him as a special teams guy because he's really good there. And if you're the 4th safety on a roster, you better be good at special teams. And guess what? Blount fills that role. Sutherland fills that role as well. You saw him get downfield and make that play at the goal line to spot the ball out, and in the game, like he's a guy that can do the special team stuff as well. So that's interesting to me. It's a fascinating competition because it's where you have too much talent, right?
Yeah.
How do you cut a guy with that much talent?
Here's what Coach Scott said about Kobe Bryant. Quote, "From day one when he stepped in here, Kobe's shown he can be physical, hence his ability to move inside." Scott said, "When you have run fits like a backer or a safety, he excels at that. Then you see his pure athleticism, his range. We all know Kobe has ball skills. He's sticky with the ball, and he's a magnet when it comes to punching the ball out. It's a credit to him and his athleticism and what he's able to do all around." So, that's a pretty nice statement from his position coach, Carl Scott. But you're right. What do you do? You're literally depending on somebody being hurt in order to make it a roster at this point, potentially.
Because you're looking at safety the other thing is it might be that Jarek Reed doesn't make the team and ends up on the practice squad. Because basically he's been passed on the depth chart by Sutherland. And if the team is trying to keep Kobe Bryant around because of his versatility, which I know was one of the things I liked about Jarek Reed, but maybe Bryant's shown that he can be more versatile and do more things, and so Reed ends up on the practice squad.
Yeah, because if you got Bryant, Diggs, Love, Reed, Blount, and Adams, they can all play the same spots, essentially. That's a lot. That's a lot of great players, really, and not enough. A, you're trying to make a roster, but B, you're trying to get on the field, and there's just somebody's going to be an odd man out. I mean, it is what it is.
Yep,
I find it's fascinating. It really is fascinating.
At corner, obviously you said the top 2 guys seem to be set, right? Same guys as last year, Jackson and Woolen. But Trey Brown's been playing well. And Witherspoon has as much talent as anyone in the group. He just get that hamstring healthy and get out there. He's probably the starting nickel once this is done, and eventually down the road somewhere takes over on the outside for Jackson. If maybe, I don't know.
Jackson plays himself out of Seattle essentially.
Yeah, he's actually doing that. He's playing himself out of Seattle, and that he's playing himself into a big enough contract that Seattle won't pay it, and they'll give it to Witherspoon next year. And Jackson gets a big contract elsewhere. And if that happens, I'll be sad to see him go, but I'll be super happy for him because this is a guy that fought through multiple years on multiple teams' practice squads to get his opportunity. It made the most of it. And more power to him.
For sure. All right. I think that's it. I mean, we got caught up through all the position groups essentially, and there's a lot to watch. There's a lot to like, actually, especially out of this defensive back group. I mean, that competition is crazy. And then, of course, on the other side, the wide receiver stuff, I think, is the most interesting position group on this roster right now to watch as we enter the second preseason game this coming Saturday against Dallas. Few practices before that, and we'll be there. We'll do a preview show on our next episode, so stick around for that. Let's get out of here. We'll talk next time, Keith. Find Keith on Twitter at Myers NFL. You can find me at NW Seahawk, and you can find the show, Seahawks Playbook Podcast, on all your major podcast platforms and our YouTube channel. And hit that subscribe button when you find it. So until next time, go Hawks.
Go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook Podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NW Seahawk, Keith is at Myers NFL, and the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.